Everybody, it's Jeff, and you can tell I'm in a train. I'm wearing a mask, but there's nobody here for like one, two, three, four, five at least rows, at least 5 rows. So I'm going to do another chapter here on the book about understanding Americans, and the one I'm going to do here is about individualism and how that impacts different areas of life, because it's multifaceted. And I'm not the only one that talk about this. So I mean, it's been. I mean, look at Pascal Baudry's book on I've already mentioned it in the introduction, or the preface. But I want to give my flavor on it, a little bit of having lived out of the country for 30 plus years, and thinking about it too. The individual and more of the recent events that we've got. Kind of like COVID. How does that impact it? Hey, individualism and masks, right? So the individualism is one that is regularly mentioned, and Americans are usually on the spectrum of being very individualistic versus being very collective. Okay, that is a collective community of people, which is, you can think more of the kind of the Chinese, more along that way. And others. Sorry, I just got that little bit thing. I'm trying to not move too much so it doesn't make any sound noise when I'm talking. At least the problem is this mask. It's making the microphone kind of do that. All right, so I'm going to try to move the microphone a little bit around so I'll see. I'm trying to find a place where it's not going to move. Right. So this is nothing new, right? So but we can see this confirmed in a couple of areas. One of them that we've seen in the past is the legal area, like lawsuits. And all this kind of launched. I mean, I give courses on requirements and things in the company. And so one of the things I usually point to is in the 1980s, the mid 1980s, the early to mid 1980s, there was a huge boost in all the lawsuits worldwide. And what did that come from? The McDonald's $11 million coffee in the lap case. That's where it came from. And that started the whole thing. It was a snowball, just a total snowball. I mean, you can just trace it back to that moment where, the lady had a cup of really scalding hot coffee in her lap and was wearing it, not wearing very much down low, and so she kind of burned stuff, right? And so she won that case. And that has the lawsuits got incredible, and you can see this. Look at like the TV shows. Look at the TV shows of what's it called? Emergency Room, I think it's called. Yeah, Emergency Room. I watch it in French, so I know what but it's Emergency Room. Where they got, or it's Grey's something, whichever Grey's or whatever Grey's something. And she's got and they're all. It's the whole thing of the whole drama of all the life of the people in the emergency room and everything around that. It's Grey's Anatomy. I think it's called Grey's Anatomy, right? That's what it's called. I can't. In French, we call it Emergency Room, the equivalent. And they talk a lot about being. There are things where they'll have shows where they'll say, if you've got something here, go talk to the lawyer and stuff. You can see that. And actually, when you're driving across America, and we did this as a family twice. Yeah, twice in 30 years. The number of billboards you see about getting a lawyer is just incredible. It's and they're big, and it's really easy to see lawyer, and certain especially in big cities and stuff. You just not in the prairies. That's not where you see it. It's in the big cities. So this kind of thing is really, it's really, if you look at the impact of how it is, there are many cases of this, and you'll see Americans easily jumping onto. I'll bring my lawyer in or something. A lot. Because the individual rights and the idea of, not others not kind of playing against those individual rights is kind of it's kind of a very important point. Now, many will say that this is, a universal right and stuff and all that. I don't believe that. Okay, I don't believe that, not at all. I'll say that it's a cultural right that is actually written in the Constitution, and it's so ingrained in the culture that yeah, people believe it, and that's the way it is. Um, and and it's so ingrained in what we that the Americans do when they grow up, and that what you do is now people do things in teams, teamwork. I'm not saying people don't teamwork. It's just that if somebody does something against you, and that is against your individual rights, then you'll take them to court. And that's the other thing. Now let's look at a more recent example. The whole COVID thing. Look at how that just went crazy. I mean, really, look at all the churches that were saying that we have the rights to be able to have meetings and stuff, meeting things, even though there was a mandate. And I don't want to get in the details of what these things are called, and I don't want to get into politics of it. That's not the goal here. I'm just trying to point out. I'm trying to point out a kind of a trait that it's recurrent, and you can see it in different areas. I'm not trying to say that it's great. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying this is what it is. And people, when you need to work with Americans, need to think about this. That you're going to run into this at a certain point in time if you do anything that's going to make an American, in general, feel that their rights are being, there's an obstacle of that. Okay, and especially for I don't want to get into all the details of all this. This is not the goal of this is the video thing. It's to kind of point out some general statements. I don't want to call them the truths. I mean, because it's a cultural thing. Whereas in other countries that are more collective, this individualism is not it's not something that's actually important. So you won't see this in other countries. You won't see this emphasis on this in countries that are more, let's call it socialist or communist. You won't see this because you're going against the whole community, right? The community is more important than is the individual. But you can see this in certain countries, or groups or cultural groups or whatever you want to call these things, ethnic groups. I don't want to get into all the different possibilities, the flavors of that word. But those that are more individualistic, you can see that these two opposing areas on the spectrum of this thing. And so if you're at all coming from a country that is considered socialist, or coming from a country that is considered communist, I'm trying to be very generic here. I'm not trying to put any political things. I'm just trying to, or if you're coming from a country that is considered to be, very consensus based, like a lot of countries in Africa like that are very consensus based. You're going to run into stuff. You're going to run into situations when you're working with Americans that's going to be tough. And you'll have to be ready for that. You need to be ready for that. And the Americans won't give it up. Okay, I'm just saying they won't give this up. It's a lost cause to try to get American in general to, and it comes up even for Americans that have lived overseas for a period of time, even a long period of time, even in such countries. It's going to be kind of tough to get them to back down on this thing because it's so ingrained. It probably depends on how long they lived in America, and if they actually lived in America or not. Like if my kids who are have a bit of American culture, a bit. Okay, I'm going to say that. They don't have this because they don't grow up in the American culture every day. They're more in a socialistic, French kind of society and culture. That's what their culture is mainly. But if you're going to deal with Americans, unless they're completely, I don't want to say brainwashed. That's not what I want to say. But if they've been completely, acculturated to another culture so much to the point where they don't even follow the things anymore of their home culture, which can happen. That can happen. That can happen under certain circumstances. Then you might find that, but then there'll be you know it can happen. And in college, this all comes down to personalities too, individual personalities and all that. But so the whole mask thing, so the whole COVID thing. So I come back to that. So we talked about the churches, but then just look at that, just the whole situation where states are saying you don't have to wear masks and stuff, and everybody else going, but that's crazy. And Americans going, we're doing it. And it's our rights, it's our rights, it's our rights, it's our rights. And it comes back down to, if it's written in the Constitution, you can't get it. You can't back them down. And look at gun control, the whole gun situation. Of course, I'm not saying that the gun situation is good or bad. Okay, I'm not making any statement about that. And I did talk about gun control over in the other chapter about I think it was about domestic, federal and that domestic police, which can cover different levels. It's the different levels of that. And I did talk about the gun control topic a bit, but you can see this again, that Americans, they follow that amendment, and you don't touch it. Look at the freedom of speech amendment. I mean, and I think that's taken to an extreme. I'll be honest to say, I have seen people take it so much to the extreme they don't even know what the thing means, because they're misinterpreting the First Amendment. I mean, but what it shows is that the point itself about freedom of speech and individual rights, and to be able to say what you want, they believe you can say what you want. And a lot of people say they can say what you want in any situation, anywhere, anything, which is not true. That's not what freedom of speech was about. Okay, it had certain limitations and certain contexts to which it would be thing, and there are other contexts where it doesn't apply because that's not what it's said to apply to, right? But people will take it to the extreme and say, I have freedom of speech everywhere. I can do what I want. Okay, so that comes back to the COVID thing about wearing the masks. Look, I'm wearing a mask. So what does that say? What it means is I'm not trying to play the freedom of speech game, especially here in France. Okay, but I fully understand, and I fully understand why Americans would do that. And I understand the cultural, I want to call it bias, but it's a cultural kind of situation that they've been brought up in, and they will focus on, and it will always be focused on, the individual. And you'll see this also, I've seen other cases where the individual thing will happen, like the paying the taxes thing, where I don't remember if I actually said this in the paying tax one, I can't remember. But I've seen people that say, no, I didn't say this, but I'll bring it up here. I've seen people that are, older, children are grown up, their kids have gone through schools, they've lived in the neighborhood, their kids went to the public schools for the kindergarten to 12th grade. Then they went to maybe to college and university and all that. And then when the kids are grown, these then they might have their own kids and all that. These older folks, even my age or older, will say, well, I don't need to pay taxes anymore for education because I don't have kids anymore. Well, that's another example of this approach to individualism. It doesn't apply to me, so I don't want to pay the taxes, which goes back to the paying taxes thing. These are actually a couple of points. I didn't mention the other paying tax one, so it kind of does. This is how this book evolves, because you find it in the other chapters, the things you forgot to say in the other chapters, right? So there's a bit of that, to the whole education thing. So they'll do that. There's another thing, the individual thing, which comes up too, and I didn't mention this in the Christianity one, the chapter. I should have brought that up too, or whatever. It's the whole thing of, because when thinking about this point, and this topic here about individualism actually brings up the other topics. It's the whole thing of, donations to well, the paying taxes thing, one of the things that the Americans want to do is they don't want to pay tax to the government. They prefer to actually decide themselves where they want the taxes to be, where they want their money to actually be signed to. So rather than paying taxes, what they prefer to do is actually give to charitable, charities and things or whatever, NGOs or charities or whatever, and then deduct it from the taxes from that. But they choose, what they want to do is they want to be able to choose where they want their money to go, where they believe that they trust. And that smacks at the trust factor. Remember the other chapter in the trust thing too. So this all kind of comes around full circle. And so Americans don't want the government to tell them where the money should be spent and the way this money be used. They would decide to give to a certain thing, and then they deduct from their taxes, and they decide where their money is going to go. So this is, again, another very individualistic kind of thing, because most people will say, hey, I'm giving the money to the guy, I pay my tax to the government decides on, how much is percentage for the education, how much for health, and all that kind of everything. This actually comes out in another statement. I can give lots of anecdote about this, where I can't remember if I brought this up in the one about I'll bring it up here. I can't remember if I actually brought it up already because I don't have a script of these things. But one of the things was I saw a number of years ago where the person talked about, it was about education and health, and there was a statement, and I remembered, at one point I wanted to say in a Facebook post, I wanted to actually mention that health and education are not commodities. And actually someone from one of my previous employers on a Facebook post a long time ago said, openly on a Facebook post, that education and health are commodities, and you just individuals buy them at the whatever price they want, and they deal with it. So that each individual is handling the vendor management kind of thing of where they want the supplier or whatever you want to call this thing, which in other countries where the government kind of does this, and it's decided that transport and utility, education, and all health or stuff are handled by the government, you just don't handle it as an individual. You just don't handle it. So this, again, is another very individualistic, it's a trait of individualism that we can see in government structure, okay? And so this whole individualism thing actually plays into government structure and how governments are the government. And it's kind of actually built upon it's in tandem with that. I don't want to talk about politics. Well, no, I will. There's another chapter about that too. Okay. But I want to get the thing. What's important to see here is that this influences, because it's a group of federated states, and each state handles its individual things. The individuals handle how they want to individually handle it based on the state they live in. And if you start doing things that are cross-state, that kind of gets fun, right? So this, I could sit here and give another 5 to 10 examples, and that's not the goal here. The goal here is to kind of help people understand who are not Americans to handle what the kind of examples that you're going to hear, and what are the things that they'll get contradiction or they'll get kickback with on topics that in other countries would be, well, there's just no discussion about it. But there is discussion when an American is going to have a different point of view on how these kinds of things, and individualism, or these types of topics where the individualism kind of, or individualistic trait comes into play. That's where it's going to get fun, okay? It's going to get kind of fun in the discussions, and those discussions can get heated, okay? And an American usually will not back off on this. So, all I can say is take it with as it is, and understand that if you're going to get into anything that's going to be forcing, if you're going to get anything that's going to begin to force a types of values on Americans that go against these things, you're going to run into some fun. So that's all I can say. And we'll get into a few other topics in other chapters about. I think I need to make one on the politics or beliefs in that, because that's another one of the main points. And I got some other things on a couple other topics too. So yeah, this is a growing book. It's evolving, and there are lots of chapters I've been thinking about for a long time. I've actually kind of put them in the outline. I still haven't actually. I still have that hard disk. I just haven't actually plugged it in yet because I haven't time to sit down and actually do this. I do this. I'm kind of on the run, so that's the way it is. I do them wherever I'm at. So and I've got a few minutes. I plug in the computer and I do another chapter. So let's get on to the next chapter.